government decision with regard to USAID and the Soybean Innovation Lab. That just came out of the blue. It probably shook you up as much as anybody else.
Yeah, we were totally blindsided by it. Things were going very, very well. We had our annual retreat, very successful, out at the conference center in December. Things were go, go, go. Started the new year. We had very ambitious plans. The lab was firing on all cylinders, so we were completely surprised by it.
Now, a lot of people may not really have known the Soybean Innovation Lab since it has more presence over in Africa, other places around the world than it does here in the U.S. For farmers who are raising soybeans, tell me and tell them what all you were doing for the U.S. farmer.
Yeah, really important benefits for U.S. industry, U.S. farmers. And so our mission, and we started back in 2013, was to establish the foundation for the soybean market in sub-Saharan Africa. At that time, very little soybean was demanded in Africa. So this was a market that was kind of unknown, not beneficial to U.S. growers. So it was an opportunity that hadn't occurred yet, so opportunity lost. So we set about to establish the foundations to develop the soybean market, establish soybean as the industrial standard in Africa. And since 2013, we've been very, very successful. What this means is that this is the fastest growing, largest region that was essentially unknown to soybean before SIL. And now the demand, it's the fastest growing crop market among the top 30 crop markets in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's growing over 10% a year. That's the demand. So these are the opportunities for U.S. growers, U.S. farmers who are export dependent. So it was a huge opportunity that was growing and only seemed to be a huge upside.
Now, funding for this was part of USAID, Agency for International Development. That agency has been pretty well dismantled at this point, as far as we can tell. Is that
That's correct. That's correct. So since I received the executive order on the 27th of January, I've had no contact with any of the technical staff, not only in Washington at USAID, but on the ground in the countries where where USAID was operating, that pulled our technologies into those countries. So, full stop.
Now, some of the USAID projects, Food for Peace, things like that, seem like that they may be shifted from the State Department, where you were, into the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Is there a possibility that what you're doing could be revived under a USDA program?
Absolutely a possibility. I've heard folks among the congressional delegations, lobbyists, other organizations mention this outcome, and it, makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's not for me to decide. I'll go where called, but if that happens, that could be a good outcome.
USAID, and a lot of folks may not know a lot about it, but it's been around for a long time. Millions of people around the world have depended upon that and what you and other innovation labs around the country have been doing for them. There's a lot of people alive today that wouldn't have been had it not been for the work you've been doing.
Yeah. So there are 19 innovation labs in 17 states that are land-grant universities, just like the University of Illinois. and have been working to build markets and address poverty and malnutrition, as you mentioned, since the 1960s. It's been very successful. We look at the role of innovation and research has played in terms of new markets, new crops, new varieties, new mechanization solutions, growing these economies around the world. Africa it's now their turn. Great opportunities there, fast growing, large middle class, great potential for consumer of U.S. products. That's been the legacy of USAID.
Now, Soybean Innovation Lab, not just teaching people how to use soybeans, but really you were doing a tremendous amount of research trying to find the best varieties to address disease issues, things like that. I don't know how many different research projects you had going.
Yeah, so one interesting one, there's a disease called red leaf blotch, which is a bad disease for soybean growers. It doesn't exist in the U.S. It could. It's on the special Fort Detrick, forget what the hazard is, I forget the term for it, but it's one of these diseases that you don't want in the country, that it's very controlled where you can do that research so that you're prepared should it come. I mean, many of the U.S. growers remember when rust was not present in the U.S. in the early 2000s, and luckily we had done a lot of work on rust outside the U.S., and were well prepared to support U.S. growers when it did come in the early 2000s. Red leaf blotch, similarly, and we now work with ARS and a team in Nairobi, Kenya, to study red leaf blotch, to understand it, to know how to treat it, to know how virulent it is, so on and so forth, so that should it come to the U.S., the farmers would not have to start from zero to try to address it. So we do that work overseas and supports U.S. growers quite directly should it ever come to the Midwest.
Now, something I think is very interesting. I know the soybeans, you were teaching farmers in sub-Saharan Africa to raise soybeans. You're teaching agronomic practices, also to process soybeans, using creating feed for livestock, creating oil for cooking, basically how to incorporate U.S. soybeans when they get to Africa into an economy and a lifestyle.
Yeah, I think many know how important the processing sector, food manufacturing, feed manufacturing are in terms of the demand for soybean. And so if that industrial sector is not oriented, trained, have equipment, a preference for soybean, their demand is softened, is weakened. They're not as interested in soybean. So a direct objective of the Soybean Innovation Lab was to support the processing feed food manufacturing sector so that they oriented themselves, their industrial standard, their equipment, their original equipment manufacturing, the supply of equipment, these were all soy oriented, and these manufacturing firms had a preference for soy. That would make it easier for U.S. soy to land and priced accordingly. Dr. Annette Donnelly heads up that unit, works very closely with a U.S. organization called the American Oilseed Chemists Society. It's a great partnership to orient the industrial sector, the processors and manufacturers, to soy, and that was a big part of what Still did.
What else is important to this conversation that you want soybean farmers and the consumer to know?
Yeah. I think it's about the research enterprise and what research universities do and do for U.S. interests in U.S. growers, U.S. agribusiness. Research is dealing with the future and the long term. SIL is not affecting the price of beans today. Absolutely not. But we are affecting it in 2035. It is this research that is laying the groundwork. We've proven. We see the market shifting away from palm towards soy. We measure that. That's a key performance indicator for the lab. We see the growth in demand of soybean growing at over 10% a year in Africa. So it's working. It's a shame that we're going to stop that work because we were executing our mission. We were developing the market for soybean, and we would see it in the next decade.
Thank you very